Hi guys, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today we're going to be looking at the problem 25 from AMC 2018. And the problem at heart looks pretty short, so it is saying, how many perfect cubes lie between 2 to the 8th plus 1 and 2 to the 18th plus 1? Right, so it's a quick, easy problem to read and to understand, but it might look pretty scary at first because these are huge numbers, right? 2 to the 8th plus 1, 2 to the 18th plus 1. They're both really big numbers, and then counting the number of cubes, it might seem pretty impossible. But the idea is, so it's, once you kind of break it down and you kind of look at what's your perfect cube that's closest to 2 to the 8th plus 1, and then a cube close to 2 to the 18th plus 1, that's going to help us solve this, right? So, for example, 2 to the 8th plus 1, that's not too hard to solve, right? 2 to the 8th, it doesn't take too long to figure out, is 256, right? Maybe some of you even have that memorized. So 2 to the 8th plus 1 is 257. And now, with a number as small as 257, we can figure out a cube that's close to this, right? So for example, 6 cubed is 216. That's under 257, but when we look at 7 cubed, that's over 257. That's 343. Right, so we need to find the number of cubes between 2 to the 8th plus 1 and 2 to the 18th plus 1. So we know the first cube after 2 to the 8th plus 1 is 7 cubed, right? That's our first cube. Next, we'd have 8 cubed, then we'd have 9 cubed. And you keep going on and on until we get to the biggest cube that we can right here. That's just smaller than 2 to the 18th plus 1. Okay, so now 2 to the 18th plus 1, we can't really use a similar strategy because 2 to the 18th is massive. But 2 to the 18th plus 1, if this is our number, let's look at 2 to the 18th. This is actually a perfect cube, right? This is just 2 to the 6th cubed, right? So that's equal to 64 cubed. So this means that 2 to the 18th plus 1 is just one more than 64 cubed, which means that the biggest cube that's less than 2 to the 18th plus 1 is 64 cubed. And thus, if we look at our list now, we started with 7 cubed, right? This is just bigger than 2 to the 8th plus 1. And you work your way all the way to 64 cubed. And this is just smaller than 2 to the 18th plus 1. And so now the question's easy. Now we just need to count how many cubes are in between this, how many numbers between this, which is just counting 7, 8, 9, all the way to 64. And how many integers is this? And this isn't too hard to figure out. We just do 64 minus 7 plus 1, and you get your final answer of 58. So in other words, there are 58 cubes in between 2 to the 8th plus 1 and 2 to the 18th plus 1. And that concludes the question. So if you think about this, this is number 25, right? Number 25 is supposedly like the hardest question on the test. But this definitely wasn't that hard, right? It was more intimidating. But once you get kind of a plan of action, it's honestly a pretty simple question. And if you remember, yesterday's video was a lot more work intensive, and it was like number 18 and number 19 or something, but it took a lot longer to solve. So this kind of highlights the idea that on any test, especially a test like the AMCs, the test writers like to throw around kind of curveballs, as I like to call them, where a question that's pretty early on the test is significantly harder than quite a few questions after. And the point of that is so that most of us waste our time on the earlier questions thinking that it should be easy. But sometimes those problems are just meant to be skipped, and then you come back to those if you have time. And so this is like a type of problem where if you get to number 25 and you read it and you give it a couple minutes of thought, it's completely doable. And that's kind of like the moral of this problem, the moral of the story. But yeah, so that should conclude this video. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Otherwise, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future uploads. Thanks, Devin, for joining.